Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Ludwig Chincarini, and I'm a professor of finance at University of San Francisco, as well as executive director of the Silk Institute. The structure tonight will be a 45-minute to 1-hour lecture, and then we'll have a Q&A over here, and we also have audience participation. I'd like to thank all the students that helped organize the event, especially the staff of USF, Sam Bethel, Tim Rasmussen. We also would like to thank our Dean Otko, for all her support. And most importantly, I would like to thank Jeff Silk, Naomi Silk, and the Silk family for continuing to contribute and make the University of San Francisco a phenomenal place to be. Could we give a hand for the Silk family? Thank you, and if you could turn off your cell phones as well. Before we begin, I'd like to tell you a story about our guest speaker. It involves curiosity, luck, and hope. No one in our guest speaker's family ever graduated from high school. His father had to work to feed his family during the Great Depression. His family wanted a better life for their son, so they encouraged him to study and do well in school. So he went to college and he got a degree in mathematics. He then worked as an actuary for 5 years. Now, most people find actuarial work extremely boring. But our guest speaker took his job seriously and actually made several improvements to the process of actuarial methods. In fact, some of those won prizes. He then pursued an MBA at Stanford. He often would go to professors' offices and suggest improvements for the way they were teaching. One of those professors turned out to be the head of the Ph.D. program at Stanford. And that professor told him that he was in the wrong program and he should go to the Ph.D. program. And that if he did so, they would even give him money to switch. And so he switched. He had no idea of how to do research in those days. So he went to a senior grad student and asked him what to do. That grad student told him that the most important thing he could do was to get Robert Wilson as his advisor. So he took Wilson's course, he wrote a paper based on the course, and then he started working with Bob Wilson. His work with Bob Wilson eventually led to a Nobel Prize for both of them. And whatever happened to that senior grad student that gave him such good advice? That senior grad student was Bengt Holmström, who went on to win the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2016. And so I said, it was a story of curiosity, hope, and luck. Now we're going to introduce formally our guest speaker through a video introduction. Thank you.
Auctions are deeply woven into our society. All of us have participated in an auction, either directly or indirectly. It might have been at a charity fundraiser at your child's school, or indirectly through the U.S. Treasury auction. Perhaps your country auctioned off electromagnetic spectrum rights for radio or television channels. Or maybe you've taken part in an online auction, such as those on eBay. The global auction market is estimated to total around $700 billion a year. Auctions are especially important to economists who are interested in whether prices reflect true value and whether resources are allocated efficiently. In other words, did the bidder who valued the item the most actually win it? One of the first economists to study auctions was William Vickrey. He analyzed the most common auction formats, explored optimal bidding strategies, and examined which auction types lead to equivalent outcomes. Vickrey even described a more efficient mechanism, the second price sealed bid auction, known now as the Vickrey auction, which improved upon many prevalent auction formats of his time. Markets had recognized the importance of what we now call a Vickrey auction as early as 1893, when stamp collections were sold using a similar method. What Vickrey did was clarify why such an approach worked and developed a formal framework to analyze how auctions function. Most of the auctions Vickrey studied involved private values, situations in which each bidder or institution assigned their own independent value to the item being sold. However, many auctions instead involve common values, where bidders care about the same underlying value of an item but possess different information about it. For instance, two oil companies might each estimate how much oil lies underground, but their estimates differ because they have access to different geological data. Our guest speaker expanded upon the work of Vickrey and others by studying how bidding strategies and private information influence auction outcomes and affect the expected revenue of the seller. After his initial theoretical breakthroughs, Paul Milgrom went on to apply his ideas in practice, helping to design new auction formats to meet the needs of an increasingly complex global economy. If you've ever attended a silent auction, you know the experience. You walk around the room, checking who has bid on what. When you find an item you really want, you write down your price. And as the auction nears its end, your excitement grows. Then, just 1 second before the auction closes, that annoying person comes in and bids $1 more than you and wins the prize. Yep, you got sniped. When the FCC began auctioning off wireless spectrum licenses to telecommunication companies, Robert Wilson and our guest speaker proposed a new auction design called the Simultaneous Multiple Round Auction, or SMR. The FCC adopted their system in part because Milgrom introduced a clever rule to prevent sniping. The mechanism was simple yet effective. The auction could not end until a full round passed with no new bids. In other words, every bidder had a fair opportunity to respond before the auction officially closed. Milgrom has continued to blend theory and practice by helping design innovative auction systems for advertising markets and other sectors. Paul Milgrom received the 2020 Nobel Prize in Economics with his advisor, Robert Wilson, for their contributions to auction theory and the creation of new auction formats. Paul Milgrom was born on April 20th, 1948 in Detroit, Michigan, and earned his BA in mathematics from the University of Michigan, followed by his MA and Ph.D. from Stanford University. He currently serves as the Shirley and Leonard Ely Professor of Humanities and Sciences in the Department of Economics at Stanford University. Today, he will speak about the history and economics of online display advertising and how it has influenced modern auction theory. Following his talk, there will be a QA session with Dr. Ludwig Chincarini, which will include audience participation. Would you please give a warm welcome to Professor Paul Milgrom.
Pleasure to be here and to see all of you. What I'm going to talk about today is online display advertising. I've been involved. I've gotten to know a lot about this in the last few years because I've been an expert witness in some legal cases concerning the organization of this industry. And I found the evolution of the technology that was involved quite interesting. It involves auctions as a part of it, but I want to talk about the history of this industry and the technology that's used and how the organizations evolved that you'll see what I mean by the organizations involved that drive this industry and what we call market design, which is part of the subject of auctions are part of the subject of market design. So let's see. Just to indicate to you, there's a lot of money at stake in these industries, especially since COVID. Even at the beginning, you can see that there was in 2018 there was $100 billion annually spent on digital advertising, and that's mushroomed to over 250 billion since COVID. There's a lot of money flowing around in this industry, and a lot of fighting to get shares of the profits that are involved. So what I want to do today is talk to you about the emergence of digital advertising, go back to its roots, the supporting technologies that helped it to grow, and how the markets evolved and changed. And the first half of this talk is just history. There's nothing very technical about it. In the second half of its talk, I'll talk about some of the interesting theoretical observations that are associated with with what we see in the history. Anyway, these changes in the organization they altered the incentives of advertisers and publishers and intermediaries, and it altered how they behaved and altered the profitability in interesting ways that all help us understand what went on in this period. So this is part of what's going on here, is the power of economics to explain a relatively complicated story of how an industry evolved. So I'm going to begin by talking about the birth of this industry. In 1994 to 1996, the online display advertising industry was born at that point. And it began, the very first online advertisement was in October 27th, 1994. This, for those of you who are old enough, may remember Mosaic, the very first web browser that we had back then. And there were more and more publishers beginning to appear online. This is from Hotwired. Wired magazine is a popular tech magazine, and their online version was called Hotwired. And this was the Hotwired site. And the very first ad was by AT&T that bought the right to display an advertisement on the Hotwired website on October 27, 1994. And what the ad sales, this was, the regular ad sales guy who was normally selling space in a magazine wrote, well, we sold them the banners as sponsorships. They were, if memory serves, 12 weeks for $30,000. That was the launch price. We raised it in 1995. And there were no delivery guarantees or any kind of commitment about clicks. But the advertiser would own that present persistently for the entire 12-week period. Not a lot of targeting going on here, right? They just they thought of it just like a magazine, right? I'm just going to stick an ad in there, and you get to buy a space that will be shown on that magazine. For those of you who know anything about click rates, yeah, can you imagine clicking on 44% of the ads that you see on your screen? You wouldn't have come in today. You'd still be clicking, right? The very first ad, people said, "What's this?" Right, and they clicked on it. So pretty amazing numbers. And this is how the industry began. It began, if you were a publisher in those days, you thought of this as, if you were if you're had a local newspaper and you went to the local Ford dealer and put their sale, they had an ad in your local newspaper, and you'd say to the guy, by the way, wouldn't you like to have an ad in my online edition too? And the same salespeople would make deals with the same advertisers. And the campaigns resembled Madison Avenue deals. That is, it would be between a publisher and an advertiser, for example, the New York Times and Nike, or maybe its ad agency, where you just have a space on a page where your ad would appear. Now, each deal was negotiated bilaterally between an advertiser and the publisher. The publishers would hard code the ads. That is, it's just like they were setting type or something, and the same ad would show over and over again. And they developed some code to track deliveries. And advertisers or their agencies wanted to monitor performance, so they developed systems that verified that the ads were actually being shown. And for offline ads, if you want to know if your ad's shown, you go to the local shop, buy a copy of the newspaper, and open it up to page 3 and see if your ad's there. And if it is, it's on every paper, right? There's nothing special about any one. Well, that's how these things were at the very beginning. But they started to evolve fairly quickly. The very next year, pretty much, 1995, the first ad server appeared, and which would sit between the publisher and the advertiser. And the ad server was a place where the advertiser delivered its digital ad, and the publisher would take the digital ad from there and put it onto the page that it was showing to the end user. And what the ad servers did is they stored ad creatives. So they removed the need to hard code advertisements. If you have an ad and you want to show an ad, you send it along and I have it there, and then I place it in a spot that's reserved for it, and the ad server puts it there. And that allowed for dynamic updating. If you didn't want to show the same ad to the same person 3 times in a row, each time he visited that page, you could change the ad because a different ad could be delivered. And that allowed a limited amount of targeting based on the location and browser type and language. Pretty limited. And the ad server also monitored delivery and tracked ad performance. It would be a neutral third party at the time between publishers and advertisers to keep track of what was going on. And so it added flexibility that allowed you to begin with some of the optimization of targeting that has become so important in the modern era. Okay, and then here's Wired magazine saying cookies then emerged, and people had mixed feelings about cookies. If you read the text here, you'll see, some internet advertisers, like the DoubleClick network, use cookies to measure responses to advertisements. The company says it tracks internet surfers, have seen which advertisements, making sure people don't see the same advertisement twice, and so on. And they say this is not necessarily evil that we're tracking you. It remains a concern today. But what cookies are little files that are stored on your browser that contain information about your engagement with the website. And initially, they were used within a website so that, for example, if you were buying something on Amazon, you could it would keep track of what you had said and who you were, and you would be able to reuse that information. But the ad servers and ad agencies quickly learned to use these cookies to track users across websites, for example, to deliver a series of ads, even if it wasn't all on the same website. So by 1996, the industry was developing standards. This was you can see this was beginning to look a little different from print ads. And if you were going to have, if you're going to be able to substitute ads into a slot, or to have 2 people put ads in the same slot, you were going to need a standard for what that slot looked like, and how there'd be an ad of a certain size, and it would fit into a particular slot so that you could be able to substitute them. Various standards emerge on ad size and format. You wanted to look at performance. You agreed that there had to be agreed definition of what it meant to show an impression. What if it's only the top half of it's on the page? Does that count? What if it's the guy never scrolls down to the part of the page where the ad is? How would you keep track of what's going on? So the new definitions were created. And this simplified contract negotiation reduced transactions costs. And we began to see some sophistication evolving in the industry. Within a couple of years, by 1996, people started to realize, well, we actually need a lot more innovation than this. So the big innovation beginning around 1996 was something called the waterfall. And it worked like this. Here's the problem we have. So the ad networks emerged as intermediaries. We have a bunch of advertisers and a bunch of publishers. And if I'm going to follow Ludwig across various sites, this advertiser might want to have a deal with publisher 1 and with publisher 2 and with publisher 3. But this gets to be a lot of contracts. It's a lot for direct deals. So instead, an ad network emerged that would take a look at, after we've made contracts for bulk inventory, that said we're going to take this remnant inventory and we're going to And instead of having advertiser one have a contract with publisher one, it has a contract with the ad network, which will figure out which ad it can appropriately show wherever the user may appear. And this reduced transactions costs enormously. In this case, instead of having 3 times 3 or 9 contracts, you have only 6. You have 3 contracts, advertiser with the network, and 3 with publishers with the network. So instead of multiplying the number of advertisers by the number of publishers, you could just add the number of advertisers to the number of publishers and drastically reduce the contracting burden on the overall system. In 1997, the next big step said, well, the publishers and advertisers had rather different interests. If I'm going to show my ad, or if Ludwig is going to show his ad, and he's considering showing it at your publication or your publication, he might want to know, well, which is the better place for me to show it? Do I really want to pay the same price for both? So Ludwig might decide what he really wants are clicks, and he just wants to pay a price per click. And you guys as publishers, well, you don't want to pay, be paid per click because you're not sure how many clicks his ads are going to get. How do you compare his price to my price if it's price per click? What you have available is an ad slot. And so what DoubleClick did is it said, what we're going to do is we are going to pay publishers per impression, and we're going to bill advertisers per click. And we're going to we're going to predict the probability of a click from his ad showing on your site, and that's how we'll decide how much to. And by making these things, we'll make the most profitable deals we can, and we'll bear the risk that our prediction's wrong, that he has fewer clicks or more clicks when his ad shows on your site. So we get this intermediation service where the ad network predicts the clicks and bears risk. And this model created an incentive for the ad network to improve matching and expand participation. It now starts to figure out, well, where can I show Ludwig's ad to get the maximum number of clicks? And it has to measure clicks accurately and predict clicks accurately in order to make money. And we start to see the industry evolve toward what you have today. Okay, now so we have these ad networks, but the ad networks, there's still a lot of unsold impressions on the internet. There are a lot of new impressions being generated. And Network A, you might discover, has a deal with you as a publisher, and it said it'll pay you $5 CPM, that's cost per thousand. It'll pay you $5 per thousand impressions for impressions that it finds acceptable. Network B will pay you $4. Network C will pay you $3. And you say, well, gee, I've had an impression come in. This guy has visited my website. I'm first going to offer this impression to Network A and see if he's got an ad that he wants to show to this user. And if yes, I'll get $5. And if no, there'll be a pass back, and then I'll offer it to Network B, and so on down the chain. This became called the waterfall because you'd offer it first to those who you believed were offering you the best price, and move on down. Okay, now if these costs were accurately predicted, if the prices you were getting were accurately predicted, but the network's willingness to accept your offer, that is the likelihood that they had an acceptable ad, wasn't known, then this would be pretty much optimizing. You would get the highest price you could for your impression. But the waterfall had its downsides too, and one downside was latency. In the early days, every call you make to an ad network took about 1.5 seconds, and on the internet, that's an eternity. You get three calls back and forth. You're sitting there waiting for your page to appear. People didn't like that, and we got a lot of users that would browse away while they were waiting for the page to load. So latency was a problem. We also had this problem that for each ad network and slot combination, the publisher needed to estimate what price would be offered. These $5 prices weren't necessarily fixed. They might offer you instead a fraction of the revenue that they were getting from their advertisers. And so you had this problem of needing to make these estimates. And you would make decisions without recall if you had insisted on a $5 price and ad network A wasn't willing to deliver it. By the time you got down to ad network C, you might regret that you hadn't just accepted $4 from network A. Or you might regret that you might not know that a network lower down the chain was willing to pay more for that impression. So there's an information loss when you engage in sequential search like this, latency lost and decision errors. So the next thing that emerged was basically auctions. The ad exchanges emerged in about 2009, and we still have ad exchanges as the dominant form today. And ad exchanges introduced auctions. So the early ad exchanges were companies like Right Media and DoubleClick, and they replaced the waterfall with a second price auction in which for each impression, which all the bidders were called simultaneously. So there was no added latency to call additional networks. You could call them all. There was no need to estimate, for the publisher to estimate. He can ask people, what will you pay for this impression? And there was no missing bid information from willing bidders. They could all participate. They weren't just sitting in the background. So this seemed like big advantages, but there were also disadvantages. Initially, some of the networks, well, they weren't set up for bidding, and they couldn't really participate in the exchanges. And the auctions had fees, and sometimes the publishers would say, well, wait a minute, I already have a contract with her. Why do I need to pay a fee to the auction in order to have this transaction? And some of the exchanges, well, there were other things besides auctions that were being tried as well, other kind of revenue optimization methods, which I won't get into today. But there were downsides to running auctions, and so the big thing that in around 2008 and 9, the big thing was there going to be a change? How was the whole industry going to change over from this ad network and waterfall setup, where lots of existing contracts already existed? You had commitments that you'd made to ad networks, to publishers, to advertisers. How is this going to change into auctions? And DoubleClick was very clever and introduced what became a winning strategy. This is, by the way, is just generally how the whole thing came to work. There'd be an ad exchange in the middle. The advertisers would start to use demand-side platforms, which would figure out how much to bid. Remember, the advertisers might know what a click is worth, but they're not sure what an impression is worth in each opportunity. The publishers would use supply-side platforms to figure out when they should run an auction and when they should just deliver an ad that they had negotiated. And if the demand-side platform wins a bid, then the ad is sent to the publisher and displayed to the user, and this all happens through the ad exchange. That came to be the form of organization. But what I want to say about this is that demand-side platforms are here serving advertisers, optimizing bids into exchanges, and they would base their bids on estimated click rates, which were being now determined by real-time cookies. They started to see, every time you took another action on a website, there's more information about you that's available and that is being used by the advertiser. For example, it might be you've just visited a website for bicycles, and the And this is a bicycle helmet seller who is now knows that you have just been looking at bicycles and thinks that you're a good candidate for an ad for bike helmets. And the supply side platform similarly served publishers. Now, what DoubleClick did that I think was really quite insightful is they figured out a way to offer an exchange without upsetting all the existing contracts. It was something that was a backward compatible system. They retained the waterfall, but they ran a second price auction before calling the waterfall. And the floor price for the auction, the minimum price in the auction, would be based on the expected revenue from the waterfall. So the idea is now I have a bunch of contracts out there. I think in the waterfall I'm going to be able to get $5 a thousand. So I tell DoubleClick, yeah, I'll let you have it at an auction, provided you pay at least $6 a thousand. There's the minimum price. Run, and maybe you'll offer me $8 a thousand because you're going to run an auction on my behalf. But if you can't clear the value of the waterfall by enough, I won't sell it to you at all. So this system was backward compatible. The waterfall contracts without bidding continued. You didn't have to change your contracts. The expected price, clearly there was going to be a price gain for the publishers. Actually, there was big price gains for the publishers. The estimates at the time in excess of 100% actually in terms of price gains for the publishers. No exchange fees for the non-bidders. If you were showing your contract and didn't participate in the auction, if you're just getting it at your waterfall price, the publisher didn't have to pay anything for that, and the advertisers didn't have to pay. And DoubleClick integrated with Google, and Google was at the time helping its search customers move to show ads not just at search sites, but also at other sites online. It was a new source of demand, which also accounted for some big gains to the other publishers. So this was rapidly and widely adopted, and but Google and DoubleClick weren't the only exchange, and the other exchanges wondered, okay, what are we going to do now to compete with this, with what's going on here? So what developed next historically is what's called header bidding. And what publishers did is they inserted a JavaScript wrapper, as it's called, a little snippet of code in the header of the web page, which is where the name header bidding comes from. And they would send a request to other exchanges before they called the DoubleClick auction. So the publisher would send out from its web page, in the header of the web page, a request for offers, and it would get an offer from exchange A, exchange B, exchange C, and so on. And it would take those, and through its wrapper, it would use those to create a floor. So here in this example, it has offers of $3, $4, and $1. And it would say, okay, I'm going to set a $5 floor then for to the ad server, where I'm going to have the rest of my process run. So this, after observing these first price bids, the publisher chooses a floor price. If the exchange auction returns a bid higher than the floor price, then the exchange auction will win. Otherwise, the publisher awards the impression to the winning header bidder at whatever price it has bid. So that became what was called header bidding. And as I showed you in this example, the price that was being used here, this, by the way, is something that's disputed, and I think the evidence is completely clear on this. So even though I'm not normally don't talk about disputed matters, the evidence, these guys are putting in prices that are higher than the prices that are being quoted by the bidding into these exchanges. So publishers boosted their prices, and in fact, this is an example of how they knew how to do it and how easy it was to do. So this is from Pubstack, talking about how to run fair auctions with no hassle, and it says, if you want to give an edge to pre-bid, these are the bidding that takes place before the Google and DoubleClick auction, you can just put this code into your website, and all it says is there's a bid adjustment, and make the standard bid adjustment, take the cost per click and multiply it by 1.05. Pretty easy to do, and it's and you can do more sophisticated things. The article explains lots more sophisticated things that you could do as well. But the point is, it was public knowledge and widely done. Now, okay, so that's what I wanted to tell you about the history. Now I want to tell you a little bit about as an economist looking at this, I found lots of things that were interesting, lots of interesting details. The first one is, so part of what went on during all this time is the targeting got finer and finer. You targeted ads to the customers who you thought improved matching, who you thought would be valuable. And it turns out that fine targeting could actually reduce the publishers' payoffs. Another thing so that's a bit of a surprise, and I'll show you how and why that happens. Second thing, if you've studied economics and you've studied adverse selection, studied Acker law, for example, you're accustomed to the idea that if you're a buyer and you're worried about quality, you're inclined to reduce your demand and prices go down. Well, it turns out that adverse selection in these auctions could actually lead to higher prices. That's another surprise, counterintuitive to if all you know is traditional economics. I'll show you that one as well. I think I'll have time for at least those two, maybe a third one. Integrated platforms have an extra incentive to promote trade. Integrated platforms, they're attacked all over the world as being monopolization, extending monopoly power. Actually, they result in lower prices and better service, and I'll show you why in a little bit. Inefficient competition among second price auctions. I think that's no chance I'm going to get past that, so we'll just leave it there. Let's do first of all, why fine targeting can harm advertisers. So this is a real simple example where I've got two bidders, A and B, and two impressions which have value A1 and A2 for bidder A and B1 and B2 for bidder B, where A has the higher total value. A1 plus A2 is higher than B1 plus B2. But targeting would add value still more. Bidder A really likes impression 1. Bidder B really likes impression 2. And if you could do that, if you could assign them one to each, you could create more value. And suppose we run separate second price auctions for these things, but with low floor prices, so the floor prices don't enter. So targeting changes the total amount of value that's being created changes the total price. The second price would, if you are unable to target and have to bid the same for both of them, you will bid, the total price will be B1 plus B2. That's the value to the second highest bidder. Whereas if you sell them individually and they're targeted, the total price will be B1 plus A2, which is less. Okay, so John Levitt and I noticed this way back in 2010. In a second price auction with just two bidders, the targeting increases the value advertisers get by an amount B2 minus A2. You move from, you get the value B2 instead of A2 because you can target. It reduces the total price by B2 minus A2, and it raises the advertiser profits by double that amount, twice B2 minus A2. What's going on here is where there used to be competition, now what happens is, he wants impression 1, I want impression 2. He bids for impression 1 and almost nothing for impression 2. I want impression 2 and I bid almost nothing for impression 1. The value goes up, but the prices go down because there's less competition. Instead of us competing with each other, we specialize, and the competition for impressions is actually reduced, even though the values go up. So that was a bit of a surprise to people, and actually was picked up a bit in the industry. And what happens if you're a publisher, floor prices become really important now. You're going to say, well, okay, if there's not going to be a lot of competition, I need to set a higher floor price for Ludwig to make sure that he pays me a reasonable amount. And so what you get as a prediction is that the publishers are going to set higher floor prices, and that's going to cause more impressions to be unsold. And ad tech intermediaries are going to be developing better tools to help them raise the floor prices, so the publishers can capture part of the value. And that all this stuff happened, and it's all pretty logical to see why it would happen. As I could tell you, the 2x2 example is special in a lot of ways, but this is a force that's at work and works as I've just described. Okay, how about adverse selection? Now, we're all accustomed to thinking that when you're buying, if you're a buyer, you worry that you're going to get an inferior product on account of adverse selection. You bid less, prices go down. But how can something different happen? So here is the adverse selection that happens in these auctions. So we have a bidder, I. Bidder I's value is C times M sub I. So C is going to be some common quality. For example, this is a buyer who spends a lot of money on the internet, and is somebody I'd really like to advertise. I want to advertise to them more than to somebody who never buys anything on the internet. And MI is the match quality. So if MI is large, it means that guy's a good match for me. If MI is small, it means he's a bad match for me. So what you'd really like to do is to get people who are a good match for your product, but also have a high common value. And I want you to suppose that there's different information. So bidder 1 knows the common value, has better information, and bidder 2 doesn't. And so they're in a second price auction, and bidder 2 is now exposed to adverse selection. He might only tend to win impressions when when it's not a valuable guy. Okay, but actually the situation is a little different from that. So there is what's called a winner's curse, in which a bidder should be thinking, when my match value is low and I win anyway, that's evidence that the common value, why am I winning? I'm probably winning, means the other guy's not bidding very much. That's some evidence that the common value is low. And so what I ought to do is I ought to bid more cautiously when my match value is low, because when I win, it's going to be bad news about the common value. On the other hand, when my match value is high and I lose anyway, that's evidence that the common value is high. So if I want to avoid the loser's curse, which is, when I have a high match value, I lose anyway, I should bid more aggressively when the match value is high. And I've done some calculations here where I worked out the log normal case, and I'm not going to put all the algebra up for you, but with log normal distributions, it works like this. That dotted line is supposed to have slope 1. It's in a second price auction, I would normally bid my value if there were no adverse selection, and if there was no common values, my bid would be equal to my value. And these other lines are optimal bids for me in the auction as I vary the variance of my match value. And what we see is that the other lines are all below the dotted line to the left of this of the vertical black line, and they're all above the dotted line to the right. That is what the optimal bid does, is it always bids more cautiously when your match value is low, and more aggressively when your match value is high, just as the words suggested. And this is the calculation of the actual optimal bids on a log-log scale. I've got log match value and a log bid on the vertical axis. Okay. So that's a bit of a surprise, and I'm going to skip over some of that. Let me add a little bit about the platform integration. So platform integration adds good incentives. Integrated platforms, ones that serve advertisers and publishers both, they're incentivized to set lower total fees than separate ad tech providers. These integrated platforms, they make money when there's when a buyer and a seller are matched, and what they're really selling are transactions. They're selling services on both sides of the transaction, but they need a transaction to take place to make money. And the burden on that transaction is the total fees that are charged to the buyers and sellers. If the total fees are too high, then there's not enough surplus in that transaction for it to take place. And this is very similar to the standard double marginalization argument in industrial organization, where if two firms are selling complementary products, their total prices will tend to exceed even the monopoly price if they're individual monopolists on the separate products. So we tend to get lower fees from integrated platforms, and I won't go over the evidence of that. There's some evidence of that actually goes on. In addition, it turns out that there are all kinds of practices in this industry that cause negative externalities that integrated platforms work to prevent. Let me just tell you about a few of them, which are listed here. One of them is called multi-calling. So what's multi-calling? So it turns out that if you're an advertiser, you might not want your ads to show too often. So you might want to space your ads and show them, less frequently, so that it's not shown to the same guy every 30 seconds or something. And what some publishers do is they send out a call for an ad, and then they send out another call for the same ad, and then another call for the same ad, maybe 20, 30 times. They send out and see whether you will bid on an ad, hoping to fool you into thinking, okay, it's not the same impression I'm showing you every time. I'm presenting it a little bit differently and getting you to bid on it. That's called multi-calling. The integrated publishers have worked to try to block that practice because they've identified when if a similar ad is called for the same user, they identify that as multi-calling. There's click fraud that goes on where you want an advertiser to pay more, so you click on their ad to make it look like they're getting more customers, where these are actually just, for example, software bots as they're called, creating these clicks. There's fake impressions that are sold. There's dirty auctions where there's cheating on the rules that go on, and all these things go on in this or have gone on in this industry. And the integrated platforms tend to do, they are trying to create they care about both sides in the transactions. If you represent only publishers, you might not do anything about multi-calling because your publishers think it's good for them. But if you represent both sides in this transaction and are trying to have a healthy market, you're more inclined to put in safeguards against those things. And these are advantages. Here's another one that's another bit of economics that's interesting and different in this industry. So I've shown you how the exchanges put in auctions, and the reason they use second price auctions is they're relatively easy to bid in. If in a second price auction, if you know your value for an impression, if it's an auction for impressions, that's what you bid, and that's all you need to know. In a first price auction, you have to have some idea, well, what's the highest opposing bid going to be? Who else is bidding? Is it a good match for those other guys? What are the likely bids that are going to be made against me in order to figure that out? And these are, remember we're talking about billions of auctions a day. This is a lot of work to work that out. It's expensive. People guess wrong. They lose auctions even though they have the highest value. You get less efficiency out of a first price auction than a second price auction when people have to guess and are guessing incorrectly. So, but if you run second price auctions and you have two exchanges running second price auctions, and we have newspaper over here that's collecting bids from two of them. So in exchange one, exchange one is getting its highest bid is B11. That's the highest bid for exchange one from the first highest bid. Here's the second highest bid for exchange one, and similarly for exchange two. Well, exchange one, if it's running a second price auction, it's going to send its price will be B12, the second highest bid in exchange one. And this price will be B22. And the higher of those will determine who wins the auction. And it doesn't tell you who has the actual highest value. What you really want to be comparing is B11 and B21. And you can't be doing that when one of these guys is running a second price auction. You can't get assignment of when you have two auctions and at least one of them is a second price auction, there's no way to compare those prices and get an efficient allocation in which the highest bidder is most likely to win. So in fact, it's a theorem that if two or more exchanges run independent auctions, and if the highest bid among all bidders always wins, then the exchange auctions are first price auctions. The only way to do that, to compare the highest bids from each place, is to have them report their highest bids. They've got to be running first price auctions. And and these days, by the way, since 2019, the industry is pretty much standardized on first price auctions, largely for that reason. But there's some question about why they didn't do it earlier, and that's, I guess, the last thing I want to talk to you about, which is how hard this is to do, because first price auctions, as I've already indicated to you, are much harder for bidders to bid in. They need information. They need to somehow estimate what the distribution of opposing bids in order to figure out their own optimal bids. That's costlier and it involves more error than second price auctions. And here the burden of optimizing bids falls on the advertisers. They have to figure out, or the demand side platforms, they have to figure out how much to bid. Now, so why didn't they adopt first price auctions earlier? Well, this is what I've just told you about. There's a question of figuring out who else is bidding and what the distribution of bids is. And these are hard questions to answer. Bidders' identities and bids themselves may be confidential, and the data for analyzing that you're using for analysis might not be current. So things keep changing over time in this industry too, and yesterday's bids might not be indicative of what's going on today. And if you mix first and second price auctions, it's theoretically possible to mix first and second price auctions. In theory, header bidding can combine with double-click second price auction and allow equal competition. In this way, you could have exchanges running first price auctions before double-click second price auctions. And if they're all bidding with some strategy beta V, where you bid more when your value is higher, where beta is increasing, what you could do is you could suppose that the publisher could set a floor. If the highest bid is B bar, the publisher could set a floor of B inverse of B bar. That is, he can guess, he over here has bid $3 a thousand. That to me probably means that his value is $5 a thousand. I'm going to set $5 a thousand as the floor price in DoubleClick's second price auction. And then by the if I do that, then the winning bidder will end up being the same. If I could do that perfectly, the winning bidder would end up being the same as if I'd run a unified second price auction. And by the famous revenue equivalence theorem, if the winning bidders are the same, the revenue is going to be the same as well. Even though this is a complicated, when you look at it, you don't see that immediately, but it's a consequence of the revenue equivalence theorem. And with an optimal floor, this can actually maximize the publisher's revenues. But the problem is that this puts this is really hard to do, right? You have come up with this beta. What's everybody's bidding strategy? How can I invert that to figure out a bid? I mean, it puts quite a burden on the publisher, and whereas the other one put the burden on the advertiser. It turns out that the technologies for bidding and first price auctions have gotten better over the years. People have learned how to do this. There's still a trade-off, but people have gotten better about how to do this, and the exchanges are reporting more and more useful information to make these bids optimally. So we have moved, in fact, to a unified first price auction today. All right, and Google in 2017, 2018, exchanges started developing first price auction technology, and in 2019, Google introduced its unified first price auction. The last thing I want to say about that, by the way, for those of you who've studied the revelation principle, it's Google internally uses a truthful direct revelation mechanism. What it does is it says to Peter, it says, Peter, where are you? I've lost you somewhere. Oh, there you go. It says to Peter over there, okay, tell me what your value is. And what I'm going to do is I'll figure out how much to bid on your behalf in the first price auction. So you say that your value is 5, and it says, okay, in the first price auction I bid 3, and then I win, and I discover that I could have won with a bid of 2. And I would have bid 2 as long as your value was at least 4, and so your price is going to be 4. This is a complicated calculation. This is, if for those of you who've looked at the revelation principle, where we talk about equivalent direct mechanisms, where you have a strategy, but and I do something on your behalf, but the price that you pay is done by a separate calculation that makes it in your interest to report truthfully. That's exactly what they actually do in the here. So the revelation principle here is not just a theoretical device that we use to prove theorems. It's exactly how Google Ads charges its advertisers for bidding in first price auctions. But that was just worth saying as a matter of interest to those who study the theory. And I think I'm not going to do this. This is, if you, instead of knowing what your information is for an impression, if all you know is your value per click, this is how you do it. And this is the actual formula. I think it's probably not worth my while going over that here. But you can actually calculate the price that I would have to charge Peter in order to for a click, in order to get him to report his value per click truthfully, which I could turn into a value for impression and bid into an auction. So this is the formula. It exists. Okay, well, this is cool. This is just something that I was very proud of because of when I was doing this. It's very unusual in a report to a court to prove a new theorem. But I did in my report, and this was a theorem about when there was alignment between the demand side platform and the bidder, and it turns out that the condition we need for alignment is that the distributions of values for a bidder have a declining hazard rate. And that's a really complicated condition. And I was wondering how I was going to explain this condition to the court and prove to them that it was true, that it's a good approximation of reality. Empirical distributions, by the way, don't even have hazard rates. They're always step functions, and so you have to approximate them. So and having a declining hazard rate is a statement about a function that it's a decreasing function. It's an infinite number of conditions that are all superimposed on one another. So how do you do this? So I just wanted to show you what I have done, what I did, just to show off a little bit. So here was the trick. So suppose that you had a distribution function f, and it has some hazard rates, which is the density function divided by 1 minus the cumulative distribution function. That thing is equal algebraically, if this is differentiable, it's equal to minus the derivative of the log of 1 minus f. So these rates are declining if and only if the log of 1 minus f is a convex function. Okay, so that's the same, that this being a convex function is the same as the condition that the hazard rates are decreasing. So here was our testing strategy. I get an empirical distribution f. I compute the logarithm of 1 minus f. I compute its convex hull. And I ask, I compute its convex hull. And so this is the convex hull of the logarithm of 1 minus f. And I define an f hat to be something that has that exactly. And then I ask, and I use f hat as an estimator and say, is this a good fit to the empirical distribution? So it works like this. I have an f, and I compute the log of 1 minus f, and I compute its convex hull, and then I flip it back and do a comparison. And this is something, the comparison is something you can put up on a board in court and say, this is a pretty good fit or not. Well, this particular one that I've put up for you, I will just tell you, is I had done this calculation for what I think it was 14,000 different slices of data, so that they, basically 14,000 different distributions. This is at the 98th percentile. That is, 98% of the fits are better than this one. Okay, and I measure the quality of the fit by the red area there, and the 98% of the fits are better than this one. So 98. These things do have distributions that have very nearly declining hazard, are well approximated by distributions that have declining hazard rates. I don't expect that to mean a lot to a general audience, but finding a way to present something this complicated and say, everything is better than this, and this is a pretty damn good approximation, that was something I was proud to have done. Okay, and that'll do it for today.
One question I had for you, you asked if the general audience might have trouble with it. Did the judge have trouble with it?
So this was considered good enough that the other side didn't even question it.
So let's start with some general questions. What's the biggest lesson that you have learned in your career about economics?
Oh, well, I think the economics is powerful, and it's powerful because incentives matter, and people ignore them all the time. And by the way, the auction theory has one of the really best examples of that. I think the revenue equivalence theorem. There is if you run first price auction or you run a second price auction under fairly standard assumptions, they lead to the same revenue on average. That's the so-called revenue equivalence theorem. And there, the people are surprised about that because the first price auction, you take the highest bid, and the second price auction, you take the second highest bid. Doesn't that completely, wouldn't the second highest bid always be lower? And the idea that incentives completely reverse that conclusion, so that there's no difference at all, shows you that the force of incentives is of the same magnitude as direct effects like that. And I think that that kind of thing is constantly surprising to people, and it's a lesson that I use all the time.
Thank you. Has everything in auction theory been done? Or what do you see as the potential developments in the next 20 years?
So there's lots of stuff going on in auction theory now that I think is potentially interesting. One of the things that's happening in the stuff I just showed you, for example, is that the bidding is being done by computers and by learning algorithms rather than by humans. And there's work being done about what happens when machines running learning algorithms are participating in mechanisms like that. And so that's one area. There's work on collusion and corruption in auctions that's going on. Those areas have not been thoroughly explored at all in past auction theory. There's work, the kind of stuff that I do in practice in my business is not the relatively simple auctions that you were showing where you're selling a work of art or something, but where you're selling combinations of goods and have to decide what gets packaged together and what doesn't. And then auctions well, I think maybe that's enough. I'll stop there.
No, go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
that's okay. Okay. Yeah.
So speaking about that, you mentioned one of your problems. I think in one of your books you have the knapsack problem and you try to rearrange it. How much will AI remove from intellectual activity? And the example I'm thinking of, some of your papers, you probably thought a lot about how to derive everything. Are we getting to a point where we could take the knapsack problem, change a few things and say, AI, tell me what the proof is, what's the solution?
So I can't predict what AI is going to do in the future. I mean, I don't think any of us can. We're all eager to find out, when superintelligence will arrive. Whether we're close or not, I don't think any of us know the answer to that. But the answer to what AI can do right now, I make use of AI now when I'm writing reports, when I'm writing papers, and it can do some stuff. It can't yet do what I can do. I find it lacks perspective. It can do some proofs in detail, but if there's a new concept or an approach to thinking about a problem, you just never see, when I'm using it, it never seems to find those things. I sit back and think about something and think about how I want to approach a whole problem, and AI can't do that. So I don't know what AI is going to be able to do, but it certainly has a lot of limits right now.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to move to some more sort of life questions, personal questions. How did your life change after winning the Nobel Prize? And what is the coolest thing that happened because of it?
I mean, you've already seen today some of this stuff, people walking up and asking if they can have a picture with me or something. I mean, it's weird. It's really strange stuff. But so it's a very famous prize, and it's had a big impact on the way a lot of people in the world see me. The coolest thing I have to say is when I got my prize, my grandson was 9 years old. And, he saw, his granddad celebrating something, and that's all fine. Then he went to school and came back from school that day and said, even my teacher knows what that prize is, right? And then we went to Stockholm, and, I took my family for the prize ceremony a couple of years later because there was COVID in 2020. And when we went in 2022, we go to the Nobel Museum, and there's a display about me in the museum. His granddad, he sees, that was really cool. Okay, so those are, so I think those were the coolest things for me.
Yeah, thank you. What is something that you've learned from a family member that's helped you in your career?
There's a lot of things, actually, but I think the first one, the one that I often talk about in this context, my father, as you know, dropped out of school during the Depression, helped support his family. He painted houses, and he's the one who sort of taught me about the winner's curse, because he'd said he would do projects for builders where he'd paint houses that were going up, and he said he was pretty good at estimating his costs, except when he was participating in an auction. Because when he was participating in an auction, whenever he won, he found that he'd always underestimated the costs. And of course, if you guys understand the winner's curse, that's what it is that when you overestimate the costs, you lose. And when you underestimate the costs, you win, because the low bidder wins those contracts. And he didn't understand why. He thought there's something different about auction projects, because they were more expensive than he expected them to be.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Out of all the accomplishments you've had, what are you most proud of and why?
Oh, well, okay. I am most proud of right now of my students' accomplishments. I've been devoted a lot of effort the last 15 years or so to especially graduate student training, but other students, the undergraduates too. And they're just doing amazing work. I've slowed down in a lot of ways, but I take great pleasure in training, inspiring them, getting them to do work that's significant and helping them to succeed. I think that's, for me, the biggest thing.
Thank you. Who was a mentor of yours? Can you describe the greatest lesson he taught you, or he or she taught you? And what are the greatest lessons that you have passed on to your students?
Okay, so they're sort of on. There's two different things here. So I think one of the things I think I learned in my career is that I got more inspiration and more learning from peers than from senior mentors. I mean, I did learn stuff. I don't mean to diminish what I learned from some of the great senior mentors, but one of the things I try to do in training my own students, and I try to pass this down the same way, is to create an environment where people are excited about ideas and where there's some mixture of cooperation and competition, where the students are helping one another and sharing ideas, but also looking at saying, holy cow, look at how good that is. I need to, do that well too. So I actually spend a lot of time working on thinking about how to create an environment where there's excitement about ideas and excitement about achievement too, because there's the competitive side of wanting to be at least as good as the others around you.
Okay, thank you. So for the students at University of San Francisco, what 3 pieces of advice would you give to these students to be successful either in their business career or in their life?
Yeah. The world is constantly changing. So openness is, they don't have the idea that you come to the university and you study a fixed body of knowledge, and that's what you're going to live on for your whole life, right? The openness to ideas is certainly and flexibility and that involves, I guess, maybe as number 2, if we're going to number them, listening to multiple perspectives, because the one that's working for you today and helps you understand, there are multiple ways to see what's going on in the world, and being open to lots of them and being willing to see. That's I guess number 2. Do I have a number 3 for you? I don't know. The enthusiasm is really, I mean, for me, well, a little secret about me, but but everybody, all my students know that if you ask me what's the most exciting thing I've ever done, the answer is always what I'm doing right now. Just maintain a level of excitement about what you're doing. If you can't find things that that inspire you, and yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to start by taking a few audience questions. For those who have the cards, could you go line up over here? There's a few people that have cards, and if that's going to take some time, I can read some of them. So I'm going to read one of them while they're setting up. This is someone who submitted a question online. How has the industry changed since Google changed from a second price auction to a first price auction? How has it impacted brands as well as end users?
Yeah, so the industry is constantly changing, and the second I've already told you something about what was going on at the time of moving from second price auctions to first price auctions. It created some unification, but created new challenges for the parties. Brands and users has got to be that's got to be specific to the. I'm not sure that I could make any general statements about how it affects how those things affected brands and users. It made bidding more complicated. It required advertisers to rely ever more on demand side platforms because first price auction is just harder to bid in. You don't bid your value, I don't think I have a lot more to say than that.
Okay, thank you. Do we have someone? Go ahead. Please say your name and then.
My name is Natalia Solovyova, and I'm a member of CFA community of San Francisco. And as many CFA professionals work in corporate finance rather than economics, how might auction theory insights help refine models of pricing, valuation, and investment allocation?
Yes. So auction theory is just one tool. I'm sort of reminded of the old joke about the guy who gets a new screwdriver and goes and tightens all the screws at his house and then files slots in the nails and tries to turn them too. It's just the tool, and the exciting things that are happening in auction theory mostly require more than just auction theory. It is possible now to use auctions to do, for example, online matching. I don't know how useful this is for you, as a CFA, but it is. We're finding that it's possible to use auctions in more and more settings to establish values and to identify most valuable uses. But it's just one tool among many. I have a lot of new applications. If you were to ask me about new applications, I'd have more to say, but I can't really answer much to you. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this is another audience question that was submitted, and I'm going to ask it. How should companies balance doing things that boost sales right now with investing in long-term growth, brand growth? And is it a good idea for companies to give big advertising platforms like Google or Meta access to sensitive business information, such as profit margins, inventory levels, or how many people have added items to their cart in order to prove their ad performance?
Okay, well, so, this is one of those examples of one of those questions that, treats the world as too homogeneous. It's not, right? Should I invest or should I consume? Should I invest for the future or try to earn profits today? That's got to depend on all sorts of things, like what your opportunities are, what's the potential for growth there, what's the competition. I mean, it's got to depend on 100 things. So I don't think it's reasonable to ask for some abstract answer to the question. Your business students will learn maybe do a net present value analysis and decide what the returns are and compare it to and compare alternatives in that way. Let's see. The second half had to do with advertising. It was can also be a form of investment and pretty much has the same. Describing it abstractly is not a way to get an answer. You need to look specifically at what was the.
Is it a good idea for companies to give big advertising platforms sensitive data?
Yeah, so we're not talking about all your data. We're not talking about your product designs and so on. I think probably what this is about, if I had to guess, right, is it's always dangerous when you participate in an auction, whether it's an ad auction or anything else, to let people know too much about your values, because they can exploit you afterwards, right? The publishers can set reserve prices based on, knowledge of what you've paid in the past. So the question about, but you want to give enough information. If you want something and you want to buy it, you've got to say that you want to buy it. But you don't, so exactly what those risks are needs to be assessed. They're going to be different for different companies. I don't think that's another one of those things that I don't think these questions are treat the world as though it was homogeneous, as though there was no nuance there, and there is the nuance overwhelms everything else. It's huge. I think you have to answer that on a company by company basis.
Okay, thank you. We have someone live again.
Yeah. This was a great walkthrough of an industry that did not start out as auctions, but unlocked enormous value and moved to very sophisticated auction models. And you touched on this a little bit with your previous answer, but what are the areas where you think is pretty exciting for new applications of auction theory or auction mechanics?
Sure. There's a couple that are of interest to me right now. Water is one. And this, by the way, water is something that when I say that auction theory is just a tool, I've been talking with some people right now. The Great Salt Lake, for example, is shrinking, and there's an environmental disaster developing there. And well, there has to be less use of water in agriculture so that there's more flow into the lake, so that it doesn't shrink. And buying back those rights is something that could be done by auctions, and I think could be done very well. I think the people there don't know how to do it. I'm hoping that I've relied on some of my students so far, but I'm hoping that if that doesn't happen, that I might get involved in showing them how to do it. I want to tell you a story. This gives me an example. For this group, people will love story. I want to tell you guys a story. Okay. When we were doing the radio spectrum auction, buying back spectrum that was used in broadcast television to create spectrum for wireless data, we were told that, these people don't like auctions. All these guys are not going to, in San Francisco, KQED isn't going to sell. They're a public television broadcaster. They're not for profit. They're not going to sell, a broadcast right. Religious broadcasters, their mission, they're not going to sell their broadcast rights. They're saving souls. All of this stuff. So KQED, just so for those of you who don't know, KQED had 3 television towers in the Bay Area, and they were using old-fashioned technology. They could serve essentially 100% of the same customers with 2 television towers just by upgrading their technology. And when they discovered that they could get $95 million for one, they sold it, right? And the largest price in the auction went to a religious broadcaster in Chicago that decided that for $490 million for a Chicago TV license, they could save a lot of souls. The thing is, you hear people tell you this stuff is impossible. And that auction, for it to succeed, depended a lot on getting property rights correct. That is, deciding the rights as a matter of law weren't clear, that the rights could be sold and people could be paid for them. That had to be clarified by Congress. One of the problems I think we have in water is that in these places where we need people to economize on water, if you can't sell your rights, there's no incentive to economize. If somebody could if somebody has a right to a certain flow of water and they could grow the same crop with half the water, I'm not saying this is common, but if somebody could do that, what's their incentive to invest in an irrigation system that saves the water unless they can sell the rights to the rest? We need the auction itself is not enough. We need the legal structures to be set up correctly as well. So there are a lot of tools that we have to use together to create markets to improve resource allocation. I hope maybe those stories helped. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask another audience question that's was submitted. In the last few years, big tech company. By the way, this is going to be another homogeneous one.
Okay.
So so in the last few years, big tech companies like Google, Meta, and Amazon, and the ad tech companies that help buy and sell online ads have increasingly closed off their systems and taken more control over how digital ads are bought and sold. This goes against the original idea of programmatic advertising, which was supposed to be open, transparent, and competitive. Why is this happening? And what do you think the future looks like for getting back to a more open and transparent advertising system?
Yeah, so I think what's being talked about there, I'm trying to read into the question. I don't know if the questioner is here. But I think what's being talked about is, as bidding became more complicated, when we moved to first price auctions, bidding became more complicated. Bidders can't do that, right? They rely on demand side platforms. Google runs two of the big demand side platforms, actually. I don't. If we are going to have a unified first price auction, which the regulators seem very much to want because they want what they consider fair competition, it's going to be hard to get back to those things. But we still have we still are able to do performance evaluations. The demand side platforms, you give more money to the platforms to get you more clicks for the money that you put in, and so I think we're going to have new forms of competition. It won't be as transparent on an impression by impression basis because the systems have gotten more complicated, and partly because of regulation and partly because of improved targeting.
Thank you. Someone's live. Okay, this is a. Go ahead.
I have a question about your gut response to the way that advertising markets are addressing. So, like, if I'm shopping on Nordstrom Rack from San Francisco, it may change the price depending on its optimization of what it thinks, and it might charge more than if someone is in Reno. And I'm wondering if you have any gut responses to that, or you think that that's the market working.
Ooh.
San Francisco paying $30, Reno person paying $20.
There was a time when Amazon used to do stuff like that, and they got caught, and it hurt them with their customers a lot, and they pledged never to do it again. I think that was like 10 years ago or something. I mean, some period of time. I mean, my suspicion is that we are entering an era where AI agents are going to help us with this a lot. Where right now, I don't know if you saw the news today. I mean, the news today, we were looking at dollar stores and so on, and how people get cheated because the prices that are shown on the shelves are not the prices that are being rung up on the cash registers. Did you see this article today? I mean, there's a lot of cheating that goes on in the world, and I have a feeling that being able to use AI agents, it's very hard for people because there's so much checking to do. I have a feeling AI agents are going to help with this and make this less serious problem.
Cheating. They might say it's optimization.
Dynamic pricing. Does dynamic pricing?
Yeah, well, I mean, but they do it often without the knowledge of consumers, is what I'm saying. I think it's going to become, and what's left might be dynamic optimization. You get the best price you can. I mean, airlines, we know, have forever, right, charge different prices depending on things that have nothing to do with their costs, right? They try to charge more for business travel than for than for vacation travel, discounts for staying over Saturday night and all those sorts of things. So I think some amount of dynamic pricing is going to remain. Some of it, though, is going to be offensive to consumers and will be caught. And some of it will be people being able to find the bargains by faking where their locations are, or and I think we'll see more of that with AI agents over the next soon. Actually, I think we'll see that.
Thank you. Thank you. But let me just clarify, price discrimination, which I think we're talking about, that's not illegal, but
No.
your argument is that their reputation will get hit.
I think some of what's going on in price discrimination, when you don't know that you're being discriminated against, is yeah. I mean, when Amazon got caught for discriminating as it did, and then promised not to do it anymore, the market doesn't work well when consumers are more poorly informed, and I think better information and the ability to make better use of information is going to help the market work better.
Thank you. And it sounds like a good business idea. Someone should start that. Vladimir? No, the bots that you were talking about that would check for consumers. I think that's a great idea. So here's the last question that I have that was submitted, and they're not here tonight. That's why I'm asking. Can ideas from auction theory, like better ways to price, allocate, and incentivize the use of scarce resources, help make it easier and more affordable for hospitals and healthcare systems around the world to adopt new healthcare technologies?
Okay. Again, this is a screwdriver we're talking about here. The can a screwdriver help you make sometimes you have to take a look. You start when you want to analyze to solve a problem. You start by analyzing the problem and figuring out what tools apply. I don't know exactly what this person has in mind. I think I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction because I want to offer something constructive to you guys. But one of the big things that's happened with with Uber and Airbnb, and so it is. We have prices, but also matching going on where we're able to use real-time information. We're able to find people who couldn't find each other. We've improved information, and that's always been a big part of market. Even before the modern era, and even before we had computers, being able to find the people to transact with has always been hard, and information processing has come a long way, and I think we're about to see an additional deep revolution in there that is because while information processing has gotten easier using computer, it was much harder to use than it is right now and will be soon to get the information you want, because instead of having to search through a series of menus or guess words, you just ask the AI to help you find the information you want. I think we're going to have a lot of uses that involve competing through Upwork for to do programming services or whatever. We have a lot of good applications of auctions, but not everything is a screw for a screwdriver.
Okay, before we end, and you can reject this, do you have another story to tell us as we go to an end?
Oh, what story should I tell? Well, okay. Well, if over dinner I'll tell you how I met my wife. How's that?
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming.